Hello, everybody. My name is Adam Thorne, and welcome to the Australian Aviation Podcast. It has been another week of dramatic, big aviation news. But before we get into that, I will introduce my two co-hosts. Chris Fenton, the man that's had every job in aviation. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Adam. And yourself?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Good to hear.
And Jake, the man that does all the work. Jake Nelson, welcome to the show.
Look, finally some acknowledgement. That's all I'm saying.
Good. Right. Now, before we steam into another very big week of controversy, let's start with some good news. So I do a lot of work with, give a lot of coverage to Little Wings, who are a fantastic charity that effectively fly seriously ill children that live in the regions into the city, into sort of hospitals or whatever for treatment, which is obviously helps those young people themselves, helps the parents a lot as well. It's a fantastic initiative. Little Wings won a group award at our inaugural Australian Aviation Awards, and they won an individual award at this year's Australian Aviation Awards. This week, Jake, you've been up to visit them as they've received a new aircraft. Tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, Little Wings has got its fourth Beechcraft Baron. That's thanks to a significant grant from the government. So they haven't got a name for it yet, but it's being sponsored for fuel for a year. So the operational costs are being sponsored for a year by Area Management Group, the owners of Bankstown Airport. They unveiled the plane at an event on Friday. It was very lovely. You know, they had a little girl there, Belle, who has been a patient with and a passenger with Little Wings before. Her cancer is in remission, and she was actually among the dancers, the ballet dancers. It's a dream to be a ballet dancer. She was among the dancers who performed at the event as the plane was unveiled. So it was good to. It was good to see that, and it was good to see, you know, her getting that chance that Little Wings helped enable, and it was lovely. And you know, kudos to Little Wings for getting this fourth plane up and running, and to Area Management Group and Bankstown Airport for supporting Little Wings' mission. Shout out, by the way, to David Binskin from Area Management Group. I met him at the event, and he is a listener of the podcast. So if you're listening now, David, then hello. I do remember you.
It is a fantastic initiative because it, you know, otherwise what it means is you have got a very, very long trip in the car.
Correct.
Which is obviously very stressful for the child, for the young person. Also very, very stressful for the family. And if you're going through a serious illness, that is the last thing you want to deal with. So it is an absolutely fantastic initiative.
And a lot of the pilots as well are volunteers.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Volunteer. There's a lot of volunteer pilots. You know, pilots at Bankstown Airport will volunteer for Little Wings work. You know, it's a vital part of the sort of Bankstown Airport ecosystem, and a big important. It plays a big important role in rural and regional health for these kids.
Keep up the good work.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I will say is to our listeners out there, give them a follow on socials. Little Wings have a really good social media presence. And so go ahead and follow them on social media. And they are always looking for volunteers. So
they may need a volunteer to wear the new mascot suit for their new mascot, Mini Wings, which was named by some primary school children from Willoughby, I believe. But that mascot was unveiled at the event as well. It's like a little walking plane with a smiley face on it. So that's nice.
Well, let's give them a shout out. If you want to find out more, go to littlewings.org.uk. You can .org.uk. Don't do that.
No.
Littlewings.org.au. Move on, Adam.
I suppose you could go to org.uk. I don't know what's there.
They're not flying internationally yet. I don't want to go too far. No, littlewings.org.au is their website. You can go on there. You can donate. You can find out more about what they do. Absolutely fantastic. We also ran a feature on Australian aviation, looking in detail at what they did and how it worked at the tail end of last year. So again, if you go on our website, australianaviation.com.au, and put it in the search bar, you'll be able to find out a little bit more what they do there.
Definitely not australianaviation.co.uk.
No, don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. We're not opening up another, like a London bureau. Not happening. On that note,
Food for thought.
Food,
global
no. Okay, welcome back. So it feels like the bad news just keeps on coming for Qantas. They obviously had this kind of bombshell of the ACCC saying they're going to take Qantas to court, alleging that they were essentially selling tickets to cancelled flights. It was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, alongside a lot of other bad news, led to Alan Joyce, the maestro, leaving as CEO a couple of months early, and his replacement Vanessa Hudson taking over. Obviously, she would be hoping to get a few runs on the board, and have a period of kind of without bad news, so she can begin to sort of rescue or rebuild the airline's reputation. She has had a bit of a blow in that we have found out that the High Court has backed an early decision by the federal court which ruled that Qantas it was wrong for them to outsource 1,700 ground staff. Jake, tell us a little bit more about this latest development, because this is another bad news story for Qantas.
It was. This was a decision that had been fought by Qantas all the way. The backstory is during the pandemic in 2020-21, Qantas sacked these 1,683 ground staff and outsourced the ground handling operations to Swissport. They were accused of doing so in order to head off industrial action, which under the Fair Work Act is not allowed. So they were taken to court. The federal court found in favour of the workers. The full federal court found in favour of the workers. Qantas made this last-ditch appeal to the High Court to say, well, actually, we couldn't have, sacked them to head off industrial action because they weren't entitled to take industrial action at the time. That was, Qantas's main argument. But the High Court unanimously dismissed the appeal, upheld the decision that the airline had breached the Fair Work Act. So it did say that. The High Court did say that there was, a valid commercial reason, but it could not rule out, I believe essentially is what it said, it could not rule out that it was also done for an illegal reason.
So essentially, when they were Qantas employees, they were subject to all sorts of kind of enterprise agreements and things that have been built up over years, and that obviously gives them the power to strike, etc. But obviously, if they lose their jobs and these roles go elsewhere, then suddenly all of these agreements are kind of ripped up and they start again from scratch. So from what I gather, the court basically said this, like you said, that they couldn't rule out that this was a perk.
What Qantas said, this was a response in a statement from Qantas. What Qantas said was, while the federal court accepted that we had lawful and compelling commercial reasons for making the outsourcing decision, it was not convinced that preventing projected industrial action in 2021 was not relevant in the decision to outsource. So that is what Qantas said, and that's why Qantas. So Qantas had rejected that argument. That's why they had appealed to the High Court in the first place. But this last-ditch appeal failed, and so Qantas, the federal court, the lower courts had sort of earlier ruled out reinstating the workers, but the case will now go back to the lower courts to decide on what compensation the workers will get.
Qantas are in a real bind here because they have fought this at every step of the way. So if they come out and say, we are so sorry for outsourcing, it's kind of like, well, that's sort of a little bit not very genuine, because obviously they fought this all the way. They're now being forced to compensate these workers.
What Qantas has said, they said that, we're sorry for the impact that this had on the workers. We're sorry for they said we're not sorry for the outsourcing. We had to do it in order to survive is basically what they said. But they have said, we've always acknowledged that it would have been very tough on our ground handlers and the thousands of other employees who lost jobs because of the pandemic. So essentially what they said was, we had to do it. We recognize that it would have been tough, et cetera, et cetera.
I mean, I understand that they're in a bind over what they can and can't say and what makes them genuine or not. But this is a kind of classic sorry, not sorry. It's kind of like, we're sorry if you were upset by it, but we're not actually sorry for doing it. which again doesn't feel like a great response. Chris, what's your reading of this here? Because they're now in this very difficult situation. It's another bad news story. They seem... Go on, Jake.
Here's what Qantas' exact quote. As we have said from the beginning, we deeply regret the personal impact the outsourcing decision has had on all those affected, and we sincerely apologise for that. So what Qantas said was they made the decision in August 2020 when the borders were closed, the lockdowns were in place, no COVID vaccine existed. Qantas said the likelihood of a years-long crisis led Qantas to restructure its business to improve its ability to survive and ultimately recover. So we're sorry for the impact that it had, but we had to do it, is what Qantas has been saying.
And we're happy that we were able to rip up years-long industrial relation agreements that we didn't really like and weren't benefiting Qantas. Sorry, not sorry.
That is the issue they've got. What was the union's response to this, Jake? Are they again letting bygones be bygones, or do they want more blood?
No, absolutely not. Michael Caine, the secretary of the Transport Workers Union, has basically come out and said the entire board needs to be sacked. Richard Goyder's got to go. Sack the board, put the broom through at Qantas. Get rid of everyone who was involved in this management decision. Now, Michael Caine did say, speaking to 2GB, that he had actually been on the phone with Vanessa Hudson, and Vanessa Hudson had indicated that she would be. She acknowledged and apologised for the hurt that the workers had been through, and she said that she'd be willing to apologise directly to those workers in the future. He said, we'll certainly hold her to that. But he did also say any apology will... He essentially said any apology will need to be backed up with action. It's got to be more than words. There needs to be a culture change. It needs that, Qantas needs... aviation needs good, secure jobs back. No one wants these jobs because they're too poorly paid and they're too insecure, at a time when we need to rebuild aviation. So he's not passed up the opportunity to stick the boot into Qantas, saying it's a company whose culture is riddled, it's a company in crisis.
The problem now, and we've spoken about this, we've spoken on the show about this before, is that she is not a new person. She is not a fresh face. She's a Qantas lifer. She's been there for decades. So she's in a very tricky position, because if she was an outsider coming in, then she could say, you know what, it all went wrong. I'm very sorry about this. This is a fresh start. But she can't. She's tied to everything that came before. She's also tied to the chairman, who's still there. So she's in a tricky position of trying to reinvent something when she can't.
I wonder how they would all feel if suddenly their jobs were made redundant and forced to go to bring in new people and new blood.
It is interesting, and I would say here that I think there's almost two sides to this story. That the side of the story that Qantas would come out with is to say we had to do this restructure to survive long term, and they are totally correct. That in the thick of COVID, no one really knew how long this was going to go on for. There was a period when people thought, this pandemic would be a massive thing for, years and years and years and years and years and years and years. So I understand that they felt they had to do this major restructure, but then the TWU also essentially are making the point that we are struggling to recruit good people. In fact, we're struggling to recruit anybody because these jobs aren't as good as they used to be. And also they would say that in Australia, which is a far smaller market than in the US or in Europe, something's got to give.
Yes, it does. And given that the jobs are now outsourced, they're employed on less benefits, less pay, poorer conditions than what they would have been on if they were Qantas employed. So look, it's a tricky one, and I just think the whole thing's been poorly handled. Right from the get-go. I get tough decisions had to be made because of COVID. It sucks. It is what it is. It's not unique to Qantas. But Qantas really need to come out and do something to rebuild their reputation. And interestingly enough, I closely follow our social media, and all of these stories that we're putting out about Qantas at the moment are getting strong feedback from people outside of Qantas. Jake did a fantastic story earlier today about Vanessa potentially apologising to the workers who lost their jobs. And some of the comments made were #QantasGate, #Qantas Royal Commission now. And these are coming from people who are not affiliated with Qantas in any way, shape or form. So there's quite a strong brand issue with Qantas at the moment. And what I do find interesting is Qantas have gone ahead and employed a PR company from the US to come in and tell them how to fix their brand in Australia, where, realistically, you should be looking within Australia for a company that gets your audience, understands your audience, knows your audience, is your audience. Why do we have to go offshore to find a brand company to come in and tell us how to fix a problem in Australia?
Well, and this is an interesting thing. There have been calls from a few circles, or implications from a few circles, some more blatant than others, that the federal government needs to step in and even take a stake in Qantas, buy up a chunk of Qantas shares again to, have some measure of control over Qantas, which of course used to be a government-owned airline.
Yes.
So Michael Caine sort of said, obliquely as he was talking to 2GB, he said, lots of jurisdictions overseas do it a different way. They say, let's take equity stakes in airlines. So we've got the community interest in there. He's reiterated his calls for a safe and secure skies commission, and independent decision makers. The Greens have been sort of more forceful in this. The Greens transport spokesperson has basically said the government needs to renationalise Qantas. It needs to become a government-owned airline again. So what the government plans to do on Qantas will be interesting to watch. Whether it decides to buy a stake in Qantas again to be able to exert a little bit more control.
What I would say to that, though, and it's interesting that this is all coming out now, because a lot of these people were the same ones saying Qantas should be handing back the JobKeeper payment. Now, if Qantas went back to some form of government equity or government ownership, they would then be calling on the government to bail them out of situations such as COVID.
One of the things that we've sort of touched on is that talking and it's been touched on a few times, is that airlines like Qatar Airways are government owned.
Yep.
Qatar Airways was able to do quite well for itself out of the pandemic because it had the backing of the Qatari government. It's I think we've sort of mentioned it on the podcast before. Qantas wasn't really bailed out by the Morrison government.
The difference there is that for these big UAE carriers and for someone like Qatar, that it feels like they're almost an extension of the PR opportunities for those states. So the reason why Qatar kept flying during COVID was because they saw this as the ultimate PR opportunity.
Absolutely.
And because if these are the airline that get you home when the borders are closed and it feels like the apocalypse is coming, you will have forever loyalty there. And also, again, without sounding too sinister, if you're bailing out governments around the world who have seen their own homegrown fleets grounded, then you have a lobbying power. Like, you owe that airline for life. But they had their kind of endless reserves of cash to do that.
Correct.
In a way that even if the government owned Qantas, they probably wouldn't necessarily be doing something like that. I would say one of the issues that Qantas has got is the average punter on the street would look at it and go, well, hang on a minute, you've made $2 billion or whatever dollars this year, and you're saying you need to restructure to get by. Well, hang on a minute, it sounds like you're doing pretty okay.
Absolutely.
So that's the issue they've got.
The response would be, we weren't making $2 billion at the time. We were, as Alan Joyce, kept saying for quite a while, 11 weeks from bankruptcy.
Yeah.
So the question would become, okay, you're making this massive profit. Why don't you, de-outsource now and hire back the staff? But at the time, the argument would have been, we need to cut costs and we need to cut costs now.
And I think we need to maybe celebrate some of the successes during COVID of other Australian airlines. So Alliance, for example, grew their fleet, grew their employment base, grew their operations. Sexy Rexy did really well through COVID. I'm sure there were inner workings where some decisions were made that employees of both Alliance and Rex didn't like, but they've both come out of the other end well.
And I think Virgin's loss was Rex's gain there as well, because Rex was able to pick up a lot of those ex-Virgin planes for next to nothing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, in terms of, Alliance is a very good example of a very quick-thinking business that was able to almost sort of take advantage of the situation of the pandemic, because in a world where you had no commercial domestic flying or very little, suddenly charter becomes a lot more important. And also for Alliance and similar airlines, when you had COVID and you know people need to be transported to hospital, they were able to adapt their planes to make them kind of COVID safe.
Correct.
So they were able. So there was an element of sort of perverse luck, but also judgment of keeping calm during a crisis and adapting, and actually being able to make those long decisions. Both Rex and Alliance were clever in expanding their fleets during this time, at a time when planes were dirt cheap, when you could pay anything for them.
I mean, it seems seems perverse, but when nobody's flying. But what better time to pick up some planes that you would never be able to afford at any other time?
Yeah.
Correct.
But finally, before we go for another break, one of the things we spoke about last week was it felt very much like Vanessa Hudson, the new Qantas CEO, was sort of missing in action. Like, where is she? We've not seen her on the TV. We've not seen her give a radio interview. And I understand, but behind the scenes, she's trying to sort of mend some fences, etc. But we've not seen her, and even for the staff themselves, they're not seeing her anywhere. Alan Joyce himself didn't like doing many interviews. Always welcome on the show, by the way, Alan.
Absolutely.
But we still saw him occasionally. We just haven't seen her anywhere, and I don't understand this.
And the only thing we've heard from Qantas is we've employed a PR firm out of the US to help us fix our image.
I think she needs to get herself on this podcast. I think it's the solution to all of their problems.
Well, the first news story we've heard about Vanessa came out this morning.
Yes.
Which Jake has written up and put on the Australian Aviation website, and
it's not even Vanessa Hudson herself. It's someone talking about Vanessa Hudson.
It's someone talking about her. And this is the first kind of newsworthy item we've heard in 2 weeks under her leadership, where her name is mentioned. So is it someone at Qantas is shielding her, saying the time's not right to go out and speak? Is she being gagged by the board? Who knows? But we need to hear something from her, and something soon.
If she's going to, as has been suggested, apologise to all these sacked workers, I mean, she could go on TV and say it to the country.
Absolutely, she could apologise to Australia for the shortcomings of Qantas. And I'm not bashing Qantas, because as I've shared, you and I have flown Qantas recently. We've had some really good flights, and we've had some really woeful flights. And that's not just with Qantas. It's been with other carriers as well. But come out and publicly apologise, and we hear you. Give us a chance again.
This is what we're doing.
Share your thoughts. Exactly, Jake. This is what we're doing.
Also, one of the interesting things when the TW, where Michael Caine said he'd had this chat with her, and Michael Caine and the TW are talking, it's kind of like sack the board, we need a broom going through that. But he never said sack Vanessa Hudson. It sounds like they are trying to be nice to her. They're trying to give her a chance. And I think both the unions, the staff, the general public are willing. I think the Australians are quite, a fair go. They're willing to give her a fair chance.
Absolutely.
But she's got to take it. Right, anyway, on that note, we will go. We will go. Come on our show, Vanessa. We'll give you a fair go. Okay, welcome back. So one of the stories I've enjoyed covering the most over the last 2 or 3 years is Google Wing delivery drones. For those of you that are unaware, thousands, in fact, I think hundreds of thousands of drone deliveries are taking place in Logan, in southeast Queensland, which is, as Google Wing call it, the drone capital of the world, or the drone delivery capital of the world. And while you may have heard a lot about these apparent Amazon delivery drones, which have never really actually happened, quietly Google have been doing it, and doing it very, very well in Australia. Absolutely pioneering. It started off with them having their own kind of distribution centres, and so the shops would sort of base themselves in these distribution centres, and then the drones would, deliver the kind of small goods to people's homes. They then expanded into working from shopping malls. So they basically take off from the roof of a shopping mall, and they are very close now to doing what they would call like point-to-point delivery. That is, any shop with some kind of garden or bit of concrete can have a drone come and pick goods up and send it to someone's house, which is a game-changing moment. Just for humanity, it's a massive thing.
Well,
I think it's incredible.
I'll just stop you there because I'm just going to be a bit cheeky. And no offence to our Queensland listeners, but with the current youth crime crisis in Queensland, I'm not sure I'd want a drone randomly landing somewhere where some kid could run across and nick it and...
Well, I'll tell you what has happened in Logan.
Not
the kids, worse than the kids. What's the one thing more angry than Australian people? Australian birds. So angry. On a side note, same magpie swooped me 3 times when I went for a run a week ago. 3 times.
Yeah, I've never been swooped by a magpie.
They're awful. It happens all the time. And it went for me. This is a massive tangent. It went for me and I was like flailing and screaming.
Adam,
and then it came
you
down.
need that bike helmet with the spiky thing.
And then I ran again. And then it came for me for a second time, and it went for the kill, and I was like to sort of duck, and then it came for me for but when it came for me a third time, I'd stop running and turn round, and it just came straight towards me. It was terrifying, and I've been attacked multiple times by magpies.
You need the helmet with the cable ties, mate.
Just
I'll
sort of
buy
jump
you one
up
for
and
Christmas.
see how you like it. Anyway, so the one of the drones was once attacked by the bird. They did a whole investigation on how you can stop this happening and adjust the routes and stuff. It's very rare.
Wow.
But even though the kids of southeast Queensland are not,
and no offence to our Queensland listeners, but I'm surprised one hasn't been nicked.
They probably are. They're probably just keeping it on the down low.
There you go.
Anyway, so it's incredibly exciting stuff. And if you're a premium content subscriber, we've written lots of features on them. So again, head to australianaviation.com.au. But we've had a couple of news stories, a couple of quite big developments from Google Wing this week. Jake, tell us a little bit more.
So this is within the span of a couple of days, though the decision had been sort of made earlier in the case of the first. The first thing that's happened is that Wing should not really Google Wing. It's owned by Alphabet, which is the parent company of Google. So it's it's under the same umbrella as Google, but it's not Google. So Wing has paused its consumer drone deliveries in Canberra. Basically, they've been moving away from this warehouse model where they would, deliver goods from the warehouse, and they've been trying to, partner more with shopping centres because they've got this partnership with DoorDash. So essentially, a worker, takes your Maccas up to the roof or wherever the drones are going from, and they hook it up to the drone on the roof of the shopping centre, and the drone flies off, as opposed to, delivering stuff from a warehouse. And they've paused these consumer drone deliveries in Canberra because they haven't got a shopping centre that's suitable to partner with them yet. They have said that Mitchell, the place where they've been operating out in Canberra, is I think near Gungahlin, and they've or in Gungahlin. I'm not familiar with ACT geography that much. Sorry to any of our ACT listeners. Sorry, Prime Minister. If you're listening, I'm not overly familiar with Canberra, but they've basically said that areas like Gungahlin and like Logan are more suitable for drone deliveries than packed CBDs, because it's more convenient to have something drone delivered than to wait 15 minutes in a car to go to the shops. So they've paused these drone deliveries, these consumer drone deliveries in Canberra. They will still be doing some non-consumer deliveries, and they still have a team based in Canberra. But the consumer deliveries have been stopped for now. But they've, a day after this story came out, we landed in our inbox. They're expanding their drone delivery services in Logan. They've found they're partnering with this shopping centre called Hyperdome, which, side note, doesn't really sound like a shopping centre, does it?
It does not.
It sounds like an arena for some kind of futuristic cyberpunk blood sport.
It's a very, very, very strange name for a shopping mall.
Our combatants are now entering the Hyperdome.
But it's home to such outrageous and unusual stores like Big W and Kmart. So I don't really think it earns the name the Hyperdome.
It's not even. I don't even think it's a dome.
I'm looking at it now. It's not even a dome.
It's not a dome. What are you doing, Hyperdome?
Just call it Westfield. It looks all quite nice inside, to be fair.
It's so not so much a Hyperdome as like regular rectangles. But they've partnered with the inaccurately named Hyperdome for a DoorDash drone delivery hub. So this service will be available going out to 17 nearby suburbs. I think 9 of these are suburbs that they have not covered before. And, Logan City Council, they've basically saying, we are, at the forefront of innovation in terms of drones. This shopping centre serves a population of over 220,000. It will support, the drone service will support local business growth, increase accessibility. It is a fast, sustainable delivery method. So scaling things back in Canberra for now. I think the implication is that they're, still looking in Canberra for shopping centres to partner with. But in Logan, which is, where they've seen a fair bit of success, they're expanding to a new shopping centre site.
Do they charge a premium to drone deliver?
So at the moment, essentially, it's a kind of free service, or they're not passing the costs on, and that is because of essentially it's in the kind of a testing phase.
Yep.
But obviously, when they do move to a more commercial model, it's actually that the price is like relatively cheap, because if you think of comparing it to your traditional Uber Eats delivery, you have to pay for the human being, you have to pay for the petrol, you have to pay for the car. Whereas actually with a drone, it's a lot quicker, so it's a lot cheaper. It's also a lot quicker as well.
Very true.
Because the genius is that if you get food delivered, 9 times out of 10 it turns up lukewarm and it turns up late. Whereas the drone obviously is flying point to point and it's flying very quickly.
It's flying at 110 kilometers an hour.
Exactly. So
it does not stop for red lights. It does not sit in traffic. It's as the crow flies and attacks the drone.
This could kind of really change the face of like Uber and
I mean,
DoorDash,
they're finished.
Because,
in their traditional model, they are finished because why would you pay more to have a slower, colder delivery? And also, again, I don't want to say anything, it's going to completely get me sued. It's quite dangerous if you're on a bike, particularly if it's raining, which is when everyone orders takeaway.
Well, yeah.
It makes much more sense to have a drone.
Absolutely. And we all know that those delivery services add a massive surcharge to the cost of the menu or the food or the
if you order
anyway.
even if the delivery is free, if you order something from Macca's on Menulog or DoorDash or Uber Eats or something, they've put the prices have been increased of the items themselves.
Absolutely,
so you can't really escape it.
So this could absolutely revolutionise that space.
Couple of other things. So one of the interesting things is it will open up sales from shops that they wouldn't have otherwise. So let's just say you want to get some milk, but you think, it's not worth the drive today. But if you know you can get it in 2 or 3 minutes, you will buy it. So it's opening up new business. What it would also do long term, which I find fascinating, is it will make us more sustainable, because it will increase the idea of renting things. So say at the moment you want to do a bit of a DIY of the weekend.
Can't wait to rent some milk for the weekend.
No. We're thinking, right? Say you want to rent a saw or something. Say, I don't know, or something that you use, I don't know, like a carpet cleaning hoover thing, right? That you maybe only use once or twice a year, but at the moment you go down and buy one. Yep. Whereas this thing, you rent it, the drone, dumps it at your home, picks it up the next day. That will change how we think about how we consume things. So the whole thing is revolutionary, and when you think about it, it's mind-boggling. In terms of what this could be worth to all countries, but particularly Australia with a lot of regional towns. I mean, you think of the amount of money that the food delivery services makes. Well, that's what they're going to have, all of that.
Absolutely.
Plus all of these extra things.
And I'm asking questions here because I'm not a drone expert in any way, shape, or form. Would it be limited to where it can operate based on airspace?
So this is
airspace?
Exactly. So at the moment they are operating in what I sort of called them like Goldilocks towns, right? Yep. So they're places that are big enough to warrant a drone delivery service, but they're not a massive city like a city as Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane.
Jesse Suskin from Wing is saying, the profile of where we like to go is densely populated residential areas where people aren't necessarily within walking distance to the shops. This is where people have to sometimes sit in their car for 15 to 20 minutes before they get to the centre to run in for that quick item. He says, it's a great way to augment last mile delivery. There's a lot of last mile delivery growth in sprawling suburb areas.
What they won't, I don't want to sort of put words in the mouth, but they would never say publicly, but it's clearly this case, is that they're trying it out out in places where if something goes wrong, they're not necessarily got a lot of bad publicity. So even in Canberra, it's not near Parliament House. It's in the suburbs far away. In Logan, they can get away, but they can test things out. What they've not been able to do yet is move to a big major city in a big way, because obviously then you have airspace concerns.
Absolutely.
Now, they will say, probably quite correctly, the technology is there to have nullified 95% of these problems. The drones are incredibly intelligent. But nonetheless, you then have to work out, how do we manage the sky? How do we manage Sydney when you've got all of these things it cannot all possibly be managed by
you could imagine a plane
controller.
flying in over Marrickville, how low they are, just
Exactly.
about to land at Sydney Airport, and then having a drone delivery zooming by.
So one of the issues, obviously, is that you've got the technology now to do drone delivery. This should be in every major city in the world,
Absolutely.
but it's not. And it's not because the regulations and the policies haven't been able to keep up. And what it needs is for one country, maybe it's the FAA in the US, to say, we are going to make a stand. We are going to put in place the policies that the rest of the world can copy. But at the moment, that's what's holding back this revolution. It's like the drones themselves are good enough, but the human beings, those stupid people, can't keep up. So it's fascinating as to what's going to come next.
I'm sure one of our fantastic people in the drone space, Jackie from Hover UAV, she's on quite a lot of safety boards. I'm sure she's right across this.
It will be very interesting to see how what comes next. But I do find it absolutely fascinating that Australia is quite genuinely the world leader in drone delivery.
Yeah, awesome.
Way ahead of the US. And it's also interesting that Google or Wing picked Australia as their kind of test bed.
In fairness, we are a long way ahead of the US in a lot of things.
Are we?
Yeah.
Go on.
Nicer beaches.
Well, I don't know. There's some nice beaches in the US.
Ooh, cuss.
Yeah, but on aggregate,
can-
Adam.
all right,
on
you can have
aggregate.
that, you can have that,
nicer
yeah.
beaches.
All right, yeah.
Better healthcare.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have the halal snack pack, and
Yeah.
they don't. So that's a third thing.
Yeah.
Preferential voting. It's first past the post is a. I'm getting political here. First past the post is a rubbish electoral system. It's absolutely terrible. And if you think it's a good idea, you're wrong.
Nice.
We've got better meat pies, probably.
Possibly.
Yeah. Our bread doesn't taste like cake.
I've not actually tasted breads in the US, so I can't.
It's full of sugar.
Okay.
It's full of sugar.
Okay.
Our breakfast cereals don't make your teeth fall out. Our chocolate doesn't taste like vomit.
This is. We're
Look,
certainly not going to be open in New York.
I used to
are
live
we?
in the US, so I do agree with some of those.
Go on.
I do certainly agree with some of those, but not all of them.
Well, you're both true blues, proud patriot Australians, like I am as well. Anyway,
We also have
You're an
like
Aussie through and through.
Course
we're
I
also
am.
more efficient in terms of states. Like we've got 6 and 2 territories. They've got 50. That's too many states.
Too many.
That's too many.
Yeah.
What's the budget deficit like in the US? Think of how much they could save if they just had one Dakota.
It's interesting. So what we do now is we put the podcast on YouTube in full. Obviously, we're big on video, and we then cut it up and do sections. So I don't know how we're going to section this
I
bit.
know, yeah.
This is Jake's political rant. He's trashed America.
two
Alex and Enoch and
Carolinas.
our production
Yeah.
team, sorry.
2 Carolinas is a needless extravagance. You
Wow.
don't need 2 whole Carolinas. One will do. Rein yourself in, America.
Well, that's America told, isn't it? I imagine somebody's waking up President Biden right now. We've got a problem.
To our listeners
We've got a
in the
problem.
US. Sorry.
Yeah.
We just cut to the White House. A reporter's passed across President Biden's desk. He says, "All right, authorize the drone strike."
Wow, I don't know what to say to that. On that note, time has almost beaten us now. So I'm going to go.
That's
go
what
on.
happened to the F-35 stealth plane,
Yes,
probably.
that's a good link. We can have that before we go. A story we didn't cover on Australian aviation because we pretty much only cover Australian stories, not UK stories, as I insinuated earlier, is the disappearance of sorts of an American of a US F-35. Essentially, they've lost it. Jake, tell us a little bit more about this. I'm sure everyone has heard of this.
Yeah, there's F-35 apparently in South Carolina. So maybe they were carrying out a secret mission for the reunification effort. I don't know. But but this F-35, apparently the pilot, according to reports, switched on the autopilot, bailed out, and now they can't.
It just carried on flying.
As of a few hours ago, they found a debris field.
Well, see, now I was kind of hoping that it was just never going to be found.
That would have been interesting, but the fact it's taken them 24 hours to find the debris
that's
field.
That's a testament to how good the stealth systems are, isn't it? It's like mission accomplished.
It is quite... I mean, so interestingly, with similar-ish situation, the British managed to lose one of theirs, but rather than just flying it in the middle of nowhere, I think they literally drove it off the aircraft carrier and into the water it went.
Yeah, right.
I don't know. I mean, bear in mind how much money these things look, a lot of money.
Imagine being the insurance company.
I'm being more worried about the people responsible for it. I mean, if you're the guy that's getting the ejector seat or whatever. You're going to be worried for your job, aren't you? You're seeing HR the next morning.
You would be, but from that story, they did do a grounding.
Yeah.
So all Air Force F-35 crews are stationed around the world, affiliated with the US, were stood down.
Have you guys seen Flying High, the movie Flying High?
No.
Who hasn't?
Adam,
is
apparently.
Is this a classic that I've missed?
It's a classic, Adam. It's a classic.
It's a 70s classic.
It's Leslie Nielsen. I just want to tell you both good luck. We're all counting on you. Shirley, you can't be serious. I am serious, and don't call me Shirley. But when the news, when it came out that he'd switched on the autopilot and bailed out, I just imagine like the blow up pilot
the
autopilot from Flying High, just like. Maybe he finally deflated, and that's what brought the plane down.
Could have very well happened.
Well, that's my viewing for tonight, isn't it? That's what I need to get up to
You
speed.
cannot be an aviation journalist if you have not seen Flying High, Adam.
No.
It's very 70s B grade. It was a massive success when it came out.
Yeah. I'm thinking what we should do over the Christmas period where we, this is a state secret, I'm told to, we may pre-record podcasts over the Christmas period. Don't tell anyone. What we could do is have a podcast where we just talk about the best aviation films, and maybe we put forward our case as to which is the best and why.
Well, yeah,
and we can invite the listeners to
as well. Absolutely, there's quite a few out there.
Wasn't there a movie recently that was just called Plane?
There's snakes on a plane.
There was a Disney film called Planes.
There was snakes on a plane, but there was a movie that was just called Plane. 2023 film. It was called Plane. It stars Gerard Butler, presumably.
So it's a sort of movie.
It stars Gerard Butler. Allying with a prisoner to save his passengers from a hostile territory they landed in for an emergency land. They could have called this film anything, and they just called it Plane.
It sounds like the sort of thing Gerard Butler would be in now. His career is also nosedived.
It's a simple descriptive title, isn't it? You know what you're getting into if you see a movie called Plane.
You do.
But I do like that. So maybe to our listeners, reach out, tell us. We're a while away, so we'll call out for that later. But that's definitely something we can do.
And we obviously want something a bit more unusual that we may not have heard of, or we want some recommendations.
Yeah, absolutely.
And maybe what we could do is we watch the movie and we film us watching the movie as a kind of director's commentary.
Gogglebox aviation style.
It'd be great, wouldn't it?
Yes, let's do that.
We would get so sued.
It'd be fine. Right, anyway, now we've gone on so many tangents now. This is now barely a show about the aviation news. So we're going to wrap things up. Chris, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And Jake, thank you very much for joining us.
Adam?
Yes, and we will be back on this show for more insightful analysis at the same time next week. But for now, from us, goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.